There is a snake alive on this planet that can swallow a full-grown deer. Not bite it, not tear it into pieces, swallow it, whole, and then spend the next 2 weeks lying completely still while its body dissolves the animal from the inside. Its heart will double in size during digestion. Its intestines will triple their metabolic rate. Its liver will expand, and its kidneys will expand, and organs that were essentially dormant for months will suddenly erupt into a frenzy of biological activity so intense that if a human body attempted anything remotely similar, it would destroy itself within hours. The python does not destroy itself. The python manages this transformation, this radical reshaping of its own internal biology on demand, with a calm and an efficiency that makes our most advanced medical technology look like guesswork. And then it will go back to sleep. Subscribe right now if you want to understand the natural world the way it actually works. Not the version where predators are just scary and impressive and leave it at that, but the real version, the deep version, the version where every behavior has a reason, and every adaptation has a history, and every animal is a solution to a problem that the environment has been posing for millions of years. Let us get into this. The pythons. There is a reason they have endured. There is a reason that a group of snakes whose basic body plan has not fundamentally changed in over 60 million years is still here, still thriving across 3 continents, still producing some of the largest and most formidable predators in the vertebrate world. We tend to think of persistence in evolutionary time as a kind of passivity, as if animals that have stayed roughly the same for a very long time are somehow stuck, somehow less interesting than things that are visibly changing and adapting. But that misunderstands what persistence means. If a design has persisted for 60 million years, it is not because nothing tried to replace it. It is because nothing succeeded. The python body plan is not a relic. It is a solution so effective that 60 million years of competition, of predation pressure, of climate change, of continental drift, of mass extinction events, has not produced a better one. Let us start with the basics, because the basics, when you actually examine them, are extraordinary. A python is a constrictor. Most people know this. A python kills by squeezing, but the mental image that most people carry of how constriction works is inaccurate in a way that matters. The common understanding is that the python squeezes until the prey animal suffocates, that the coils tightened until the animal cannot breathe and eventually runs out of oxygen and dies. And while it is true that suffocation is part of what happens, more recent research has revealed that it is probably not the primary mechanism. What constriction actually does, in the most immediate and lethal way, is compress the cardiovascular system so rapidly and so thoroughly that the heart cannot circulate blood. The prey dies of cardiac arrest and circulatory failure within seconds, not of suffocation over minutes. The python, in other words, is not slowly squeezing the breath out of something. It is applying a pressure so precisely targeted at the core of the body that the pumping system that keeps everything alive simply stops. The force required to do this. The pressure that a large python can generate with its constricting coils has been estimated at somewhere between 6.5 and 8 pounds per square inch in large individuals applied across multiple points simultaneously, and the python adjusts that pressure in real time, responding to every breath the prey takes, every heartbeat, every movement, every attempt at escape, tightening fractionally with each exhale, releasing fractionally with each inhale, never letting the prey use its own respiratory movement to loosen the grip. It is simultaneously a killing machine and a sensory system, feeling for the slight as efficiently as possible. This is not brutality. This is engineering. Let us go to the places where pythons actually live, because the geography of the python world is itself a map of some of the most extraordinary ecosystems on Earth. The reticulated python, which holds the record for the longest snake in the world, with confirmed specimens exceeding 7 meters and credible reports of individuals pushing toward 8. lives across Southeast Asia, in the rainforests and river systems and mangrove swamps of Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, Myanmar. It is an animal of water and dense vegetation, of lowland, jungle, and riverbank, of places where the canopy closes overhead, and the ground is a tangle of roots and fallen trees, and it is possible to be within 2 meters of a 7-meter snake and not see it. The Burmese python, close relative of the reticulated, ranges from South and Southeast Asia through the foothills of the Himalayas, down into the river deltas of Myanmar and Thailand. The African rock python divides into 2 subspecies across sub-Saharan Africa, ranging from the Sahel and the great river systems of West Africa through Central Africa and down into the savannas and forests of the south. The ball python, smallest of the African pythons proper, though not by a significant margin, lives in West and Central Africa, in the grasslands and forest edges, and termite mound complexes that dot the landscape. The carpet pythons and diamond pythons of Australia and New Guinea have carved out ecological niches across an entire continent, adapting to deserts and rainforests and temperate eucalyptus woodland. The blood python and its relatives hold down the peat swamps and lowland forests of southeast. Different habitats and different ecological roles share the fundamental python design. The long, muscular body. The backward curving teeth designed to grip and hold rather than cut and tear. The heat-sensitive pit organs, present in most pythons as a row of small pits along the upper and lower lips, that can detect the infrared radiation emitted by warm-bodied animals, essentially creating a thermal image of the surrounding environment that functions in complete darkness, in dense vegetation, under any conditions at all. The jaw that can dislocate in all 4 quadrants simultaneously to accommodate prey items far wider than the snake's own. Resting head diameter. The slow metabolism that allows weeks or months between meals. The absolute patience that makes this metabolism possible. The patience. This is the quality that is hardest to fully appreciate when you think about pythons, because we experience time in a fundamentally different way. A python can lie in ambush position, coiled in the fork of a tree or pressed against a game trail along a riverbank, completely motionless, barely breathing at a perceptible level, conserving energy at a rate so efficient that it is burning a small fraction of what a mammal of equivalent size would require to simply stay alive, for days, for weeks in some documented cases. Waiting, not bored, not impatient, not planning or worrying or calculating, just waiting, in a state of metabolic near suspension, with every sense engaged and calibrated to detect the specific combination of stimuli. That means a meal is approaching. The heat pits are detecting the thermal signatures of passing animals. The forked tongue is collecting chemical particles from the air and ground, and transferring them to the Jacobson's organ in the roof of the mouth, a chemoreceptive structure that processes scent information with a sensitivity that dwarfs the human sense of smell. The eyes, though not a python's primary sensory tool, are registering movement. The body itself, in contact with the ground or the branch, is feeling vibrations conducted through the substrate, the footstep of a deer 20 meters away. The movement of a bird in the vegetation above. A waiting python is not inactive. It is an integrated sensory system operating at full capacity, processing an enormous amount of information about the environment around it, filtering out the irrelevant, and maintaining a state of readiness that can transition from stillness to explosive action in a fraction of a second. And then something walks within range. The strike of a large python is fast enough that high-speed cameras running at hundreds of frames per second are required to fully analyze it. The head shoots forward, and the jaws make contact, and the grip is established before the prey animal has processed what has happened. In the same continuous motion the coils come. A python does not strike and then separately begin to coil. The coiling begins essentially simultaneously with the bite, the body flowing around the prey animal, in a movement that looks fluid and even graceful, At speed, the loops positioning themselves around the chest and abdomen, the regions of the body where compression will immediately affect the cardiovascular system. From first contact to effective constriction is a matter of seconds. For a large deer or a pig or a human-sized animal, from the prey's perspective, there is the briefest moment between the initial grip and the onset of the coils, when escape might theoretically be possible, and then that window closes and the physics take over. The prey animal fights. Of course it does. A deer will thrash. A pig will squeal and try to bite. A monitor lizard, itself a formidable predator, will scratch and whip its tail and do everything its own survival machinery tells it to do. The python absorbs this. The coils do not break. The python does not let go. The teeth, set in multiple rows on both upper and lower jaws, curve backward so that struggling prey actually drives the teeth deeper, the pulling away motion that every trapped animal instinctively attempts working directly against it. And the coils respond to every movement, every breath, every heartbeat, the pressure escalating, the cardiovascular system failing, the prey going still. It takes seconds for a large prey animal to die in a python's coils, sometimes less. Then comes the part that is in some ways even more impressive than the killing. Then comes the eating. The python does not have hands. It cannot tear its prey, or cut it, or break it into manageable pieces. It must consume it whole, starting at one end, working the body slowly through jaws that are remodeling themselves in real time to accommodate the diameter of the meal. The lower jaw of a python is not fused at the chin the way a mammal's jaw is. The two halves are connected by a flexible ligament and can spread independently, each side of the jaw walking alternately forward while the backward curving teeth grip and advance, grip and advance, grip and advance. In a slow time, the python is maximally vulnerable, its movement compromised by the presence of a large undigested mass in its body, its sensory focus partially occupied by the mechanical demands of continued swallowing. This is when the python is most at risk from its own predators, from large cats in Asia and Africa, from crocodilians in water-adjacent habitats, from humans. It is a calculated vulnerability, the price of a nutritional investment large enough to sustain the snake for months. And then the digestion begins. And this is where we return to what I told you at the very beginning, because the biology of python digestion is one of the most remarkable things in all of vertebrate physiology, and it has attracted the serious attention of medical researchers who believe that understanding how a python accomplishes this transformation might have profound implications for treating human heart disease. When a python has not eaten for a long time, its internal organs essentially down-regulate. They do not stop functioning entirely, but they operate at reduced capacity, consuming minimal energy, waiting. The heart shrinks slightly. The intestines, the primary site of nutrient absorption, reduce their mucosal surface area, essentially folding back the elaborate microscopic architecture of villi and microvilli that provides the absorptive surface. The liver reduces its activity. The kidneys do the same. The snake is in a state of metabolic minimalism, burning through its reserves as slowly as possible, keeping the most essential processes running and placing everything else on standby. Within 24 hours of swallowing a large meal, all of this reverses in a cascade of physiological change that researchers have described as almost explosive. The heart muscle increases in mass by somewhere between 25 and 40%. Not because new heart cells have been generated, that would take far longer, but because the existing heart muscle cells are taking up fats from the bloodstream and using them to grow in a way that increases their contractile force. The intestines regenerate their full microvillus architecture, dramatically increasing their absorptive surface area. The liver expands, and its metabolic enzymes ramp up to process the flood of nutrients that will be coming. Stomach acid production, minimal during the fasting period, surges to levels among the highest measured in any vertebrate species. Bile secretion increases, digestive enzyme production increases. The entire gut becomes a high-throughput nutrient extraction system, and over the following days and weeks, it will break down an entire large animal, bones and fur and hooves included, extracting the nutrients with an efficiency that staggers comparison to our own digestive capabilities. Reason cardiac researchers care about the python heart's ability to grow rapidly and then return to normal size without damage is that this process mimics, in a controlled and apparently harmless way, the pathological cardiac enlargement that occurs in human heart disease. When a human heart enlarges in response to high blood pressure or valve disease or other pathological conditions, the enlargement is associated with damage, with fibrosis, with deteriorating function. When the python heart enlarges in response to a meal, there is no damage, no fibrosis, no deterioration. The heart grows, performs its enhanced function during the digestion period, and then returns to its resting size. The molecular signals that direct this process have been identified and studied, and the hope is that understanding them might eventually lead to therapies that allow damaged human hearts to regenerate rather than scar. The python, in other words, might save human lives. Let us go deeper into the habitats. Let us go to the specific places where python kingdoms have established themselves most completely, where the snake reaches its full expression as an apex predator and an ecological force. The Sumatran rainforest. This is one of the last places on Earth where you can walk through primary lowland tropical rainforest that has never been logged, never been converted, never been fragmented, a contiguous ancient forest of staggering complexity and density. The trees here are the kind of trees that take your breath away, not because they are uniformly tall and impressive, in the way that temperate forests can be impressively uniform, but because no two things in a tropical rainforest are the same. Every tree has a different architecture. Every tree hosts a different community of organisms. Every square meter of forest floor is a different ecosystem from the square meter next to it. And threading through this complexity, using every structural feature of the forest as cover, as highway, as ambush position, is the reticulated python. The reticulated python is the longest snake in the world, and in the Sumatran rainforest, it reaches its greatest size. There are credible records of specimens exceeding 7 meters in length, weighing over 150 kilograms, animals of such scale, that the forest itself seems different when you know they are present. And the way you know they are present, most of the time, is not by seeing them. It is by not seeing them. It is by looking at a tangle of roots and buttresses, at the base of a large strangler fig and realizing that some of what you took for a root is not a root. It is by noticing that the pattern of dead leaves along a riverbank is not quite the same texture in one section as in the others. It is by the quality of silence in a section of forest where the birds and the small mammals have gone, quiet in a way that tells you something is there. The reticulated python's camouflage is one of the finest examples of pattern-based concealment in the vertebrate world. The name reticulated comes from the Latin for net-patterned, and the complex geometric design of light and dark scales that covers the body of this snake does not represent any one thing in particular. It does not look like leaves or bark or any specific element of the forest. Instead, it represents the principle of the forest, the irregular interlocking of light and shadow, the way sunlight that has filtered through multiple layers of canopy arrives at the forest floor, broken into patches that are too various and too complex to be read as a coherent pattern. The python's scales replicate this complexity. They break up the outline of the body in the way that high-contrast, irregular patterns break up outlines, and they do it at multiple scales simultaneously, working on both the close observer and the distant one. A 7-meter reticulated python in a riverine tangle of roots and water and shadows is not invisible. Nothing that large is truly invisible, but it is profoundly difficult to see, in the same way that the answer to a visual puzzle is difficult to see even when it is right in front of you. Your brain is looking for the shape of a snake. It is looking for the smooth cylinder, the regular pattern, the clear outline. The forest floor offers none of those things clearly, and the python's patterning works precisely because it frustrates the mental template you are searching for. The diet of the reticulated python in its native Sumatran habitat is a list of the forest's most significant prey species. Deer, specifically the barking deer and the larger sambar. Wild pigs, including the bearded pig that is abundant in Sumatran lowland forest. Primates, including macaques and langurs, and in areas of overlap, orangutans, though the taking of an adult orangutan would be exceptional, and the primate prey would be juveniles and subadults, civets and binturongs and monitor lizards and large ground birds. In riverine habitats, in the mangrove fringes and river edges that are prime reticulated python territory, water monitor lizards and fishing cats and otters and various water birds. And water itself is important because the reticulated python is an excellent swimmer, capable of crossing wide rivers and of hunting in and around water with the ease of an animal that has been doing so for millions of years. The hunting strategy varies with habitat. In dense forest, where visibility is low and scent and thermal detection are the primary tools, the ambush strategy predominates. The python positions itself on a game trail or near a water source in a coiled or partially coiled posture that minimizes its silhouette and conceals the head and waits for prey to come within striking range. Near rivers and water holes, the geometry of the ambush changes because the prey's movement is more predictable. Animals must drink. They approach the water from the upwind side. If they are careful, they pause at the edge. They lower their heads to drink. And the python, lying in the shallows or in the root tangle at the bank, exploits every moment of that approach and that vulnerable pause. The strike from water is particularly effective because water transmits vibration differently than air, and because the prey animal's attention is divided between the water source and the terrestrial environment, not adequately accounting for the threat below the surface. A python striking from water has the element of a medium transition in its favor, the prey processing what it sees in air, the strike coming from below the line of that processing. In trees, the strategy is different again. Reticulated pythons, particularly juveniles and younger adults whose body weight has not yet made arboreal life impractical, are competent climbers. They use trees for thermoregulation, basking on branches where sunlight penetrates the canopy. They use trees for shelter, coiling in the forks of large trees or among the aerial roots of figs. And they use trees for ambush, hanging motionless from branches over trails, ready to strike downward onto prey passing below. The downward strike has the advantage of gravity assisting the closing of the coils and the disadvantage of requiring the prey to come to a very specific location, which means the tree-hunting python must position itself correctly, using scent detection to identify heavily traveled routes and then placing itself above the most likely passage point. The social life of pythons, to the extent that we can call it that, is organized primarily around reproduction, because outside of the mating season, pythons are fundamentally solitary animals, crossing each other's ranges without seeking out or maintaining social bonds. But the mating aggregations of pythons, particularly in species like the ball python and the Burmese python, are remarkable events that represent a temporary convergence of animals that spend the rest of their lives in relative isolation. The ball python's mating season in West Africa coincides with the dry season, when the Harmattan wind brings dry air down from the Sahara, and the landscape transitions from the lush greenery of the wet season to the drier, brittler look of savanna under stress. During this period, female ball pythons that are reproductively ready begin to release pheromones, chemical signals that travel through the environment and are detected by the chemical sensory systems of males in the vicinity. A male following a pheromone trail to a female is doing something that looks, from the outside, almost pathetically simple. It is moving along a gradient of increasing chemical signal concentration, tongue flicking constantly, reading the chemistry of the air and ground, adjusting its direction to maximize signal intensity. But the sensitivity of the system is extraordinary. Males have been observed following pheromone trails over distances of hundreds of meters across complex terrain, navigating around obstacles, picking up trails that have been interrupted by rain or wind, persisting in the search for days. When a male reaches a female, the courtship begins, and courtship in pythons is not the brief affair it is in many reptiles. Male ball pythons have pelvic spurs, vestigial remnants of the hind limb girdle that persist as tiny claw-like structures on either side of the cloaca, and these spurs are used during courtship to stimulate the female, the male raking them gently along the female's sides in a behavior that appears to be part of the evaluation process. The female is not passive in this. She can accept or reject the male's advances, and in situations where multiple males are competing for a single female, the males will jostle and intertwine and attempt to outcompete each other in a slow-motion wrestling match that is unlike anything in mammalian courtship behavior and fascinating in its mechanical directness. The eggs. This is where the maternal behavior of pythons surprises almost everyone who encounters it for the first time, because pythons are reptiles, and the popular understanding of reptile reproduction is that the female lays her eggs and walks away, and the eggs are on their own. This is accurate for many reptiles. It is not accurate for pythons. Female pythons, all species, are maternal in a way that is striking and, in at least one species, involves a genuinely sophisticated thermoregulatory behavior that pushes the definition of endothermy. A female python, after laying her eggs, coils around them. She wraps her body around the clutch in a protective spiral, her head positioned to face any threat, her coils adjusting and readjusting to keep the eggs covered and protected. In itself, this is notable. What makes it extraordinary in some species is what happens next. The Burmese python, the Indian python, the ball python, the African rock python all possess the ability to generate heat by muscular contractions when incubating their eggs. The female will shiver, not in the way a cold mammal shivers, as an involuntary response to cold that generates heat as a side effect, but as a deliberate, sustained behavior, rhythmic, muscular contractions of the body that generate heat specifically for the purpose of warming the eggs, maintaining the nest temperature above ambient when ambient is not warm enough for proper embryonic development. This is a form of behavioral endothermy. The python is, in this context, regulating its own body temperature through internal heat generation, something that we normally associate exclusively with birds and mammals. It is not doing it all the time. It is not doing it in the way that birds and mammals maintain a constant internal temperature, regardless of external conditions. But it is doing it deliberately in a specific behavioral context, using a physiological mechanism that is the same mechanism mammals and birds use, just deployed intermittently and under voluntary control rather than as a continuous automatic system. A female Burmese python incubating a clutch of eggs has been measured at core body temperatures 6 to 7 degrees Celsius above the ambient air temperature of the nest. She maintains this for the entire incubation period, which can last 60 to 80 days. She does not eat during this entire period. She leaves the nest only briefly, if at all, to bask in sunlight and recharge her thermal reserves before returning to the eggs. She loses a significant fraction of her body mass during the incubation period, converting her own tissues into the energy that warms the eggs. She is, in the most literal possible sense, sacrificing her own body reserves to ensure the survival of the next generation. The eggs of a large Burmese python clutch can number anywhere from 20 to over 100. The eggs are leathery, not calcified like bird eggs, and they adhere to each other in a mass that the female's coils conform around. The contact between egg and scale surface, and the warmth flowing through those scales, creating the thermal environment the embryos require. When the incubation is complete, when the embryos have fully developed and are ready to emerge, they use an egg tooth, a small specialized scale on the tip of the snout, to cut through the leathery shell. The emergence is not instantaneous. The hatchling cuts a slit and then pauses, often spending hours or even days partially emerged, the head out but the body still inside the shell, chemosensing the outside world before fully committing to entry into it. The mother in most python species does not continue to care for the hatchlings after they emerge. The maternal bond ends with the egg stage. The hatchlings disperse immediately, each one genetically equipped with everything it needs to begin the solitary, patient life of a python. The hunting instincts, the constriction behavior, the thermoregulatory responses, the sensory systems, born knowing what they are, needing no instruction. But let us talk about something that the current moment has made urgently necessary to discuss. Let us talk about what happens when the most formidable constrictor in the world ends up somewhere it was not born to be. Let us talk about Florida. The Burmese python in the Florida Everglades is the most significant invasive species crisis of any large predator in the continental United States, and it is a crisis that illuminates the python's capabilities in a way that no other situation quite does, because the Everglades, for all its apparent similarity to the subtropical Asian habitats of the Burmese python, is not a place that evolved with a top-level constricting predator of this size. And the difference between an ecosystem that has evolved alongside a predator and one that has not is the difference between a landscape and a catastrophe. The Burmese python arrived in the Everglades through the pet trade. People bought hatchlings because they were small and attractive and manageable. They grew. Burmese pythons grow fast, reaching over 2 meters in the first year, over 3 in the second, continuing to grow throughout their lives at a rate that makes their adult size very difficult to predict from their hatchling appearance. People released them, whether intentionally or through escape during Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which damaged exotic animal facilities across South Florida and potentially released a large number of individuals simultaneously, or through deliberate abandonment by owners who found themselves with a 6-meter snake they could not manage. The pythons entered the Everglades ecosystem. And the Everglades ecosystem, which had not evolved in the presence of this predator, had essentially no behavioral defenses against it. The deer and the raccoons and the opossums and the rabbits and the wading birds of the Everglades had not developed the wariness, the alarm behaviors, the predator recognition responses that prey populations in Asia carry in their behavioral repertoire because they have been prey to large pythons for millions of years. An Everglades white-tailed deer encountering a Burmese python has no ancestral memory of this threat. It does not recognize the coiled shape in the palmettos as something to flee. The python is invisible to its warning systems in a way that a Florida panther, a predator with which Florida deer share an evolutionary history, is not. The results have been measured. Population surveys of medium-sized mammals in areas of the Everglades with established python populations show declines that are among the most dramatic ever recorded for invasive species impacts. Raccoon populations down by over 97% in some areas. Opossum populations down by over 98%. Bobcat sightings essentially eliminated. Marsh rabbit and cottontail rabbit effectively gone. The pythons have eaten their way through the prey base of an entire ecosystem with an efficiency that reflects exactly what the python body plan was, designed to do silently, patiently, absolutely effectively, in a landscape that offered no resistance. The management response has been complex and expensive, and only partially successful. Python removal programs involve trained hunters moving through the Everglades on foot and by airboat, using the same thermal detection technology that the pythons themselves use, infrared cameras mounted on drones, to locate animals that are otherwise essentially impossible to find in dense sawgrass and cypress swamp. Python detection dogs, animals trained to locate the chemical signature of python skin, have been used in accessible areas. Radio tagging of captured males and releasing them during the breeding season, allowing them to lead researchers to breeding aggregations where larger numbers of animals can be removed, has been one of the more creative management tools employed. Annual Python challenges, involving large numbers of registered participants searching for and removing pythons, have generated public engagement and contributed to the removal effort. But the fundamental challenge remains. The Everglades is enormous, over 2 million acres of difficult terrain. The pythons are extraordinarily difficult to detect. They reproduce prolifically. A single large female can lay 70 to 100 eggs in a clutch. They grow fast. They have no natural predators in Florida capable of controlling their population. The American alligator, Florida's apex predator prior to the python's arrival, has been documented in encounters with large pythons that go both ways, with neither animal holding a consistent advantage. The python has, in effect, inserted itself into the apex predator guild of the Everglades as a full equal. This situation, as ecologically catastrophic as it is, tells us something important about the python, something that all the data on metabolism and constriction force and heat pit sensitivity can only partly convey. It tells us that the python is a complete predator, a predator without significant gaps in its capabilities, a predator that works. In a new environment, against prey that has no experience of it, in a climate broadly similar to, but not identical to its native range, the Burmese python has not just survived. It has colonized, it has reorganized an ecosystem around its presence. It has demonstrated the proposition that the python body plan, 60 million years old, represents a form of predatory perfection that transcends the specific ecological context in which it evolved. That is humbling, in the way that the natural world is always humbling when you look at it directly. Let us go back to the old world. Let us go back to the places where the python belongs, where it has always been, where the ecosystem knows it, and has organized itself around its presence across millions of years of shared evolution. Let us go to the floodplains of the Ganges Delta, to the Sundarbans, the vast mangrove forest at the mouth of the world's great river complex, where India and Bangladesh meet the Bay of Bengal in a tidal landscape of creeks and mudflats and mangrove roots, and a biodiversity so compressed and so complex that scientists are still discovering new species within it. The Indian python lives here. It is one of the largest snakes in the world, slightly stockier than the reticulated, and in most specimens slightly shorter, though exceptional individuals approach 6 meters in length. In the Sundarbans, the Indian python shares its kingdom with the Bengal tiger, the saltwater crocodile, the Ganges river dolphin, the spotted deer, the wild boar, and hundreds of species of birds, whose population here represents one of the most significant avian assemblages in South Asia. The relationship between the Indian python and this ecosystem is ancient, the prey species carrying the behavioral responses to python predation that the Everglades prey species do not, the ecosystem balanced in the way that long co-evolved systems are balanced. The Sundarbans tiger, famous as the most consistently man-eating population of tigers in the world, a reputation that is somewhat unfair and significantly overstated, but not entirely without basis, is not a predator of the Indian python. These two apex predators share the Sundarbans without the kind of direct competition you might expect between animals of similar size at the top of their respective food chains. They partition the ecosystem not physically, but temporally, and in terms of prey size and hunting method. The tiger takes the larger prey, the deer and the boar, actively, using stalking and the final explosive chase. The python takes a wider size range of prey, including the tiger's prey species, when opportunity presents, using the ambush. They coexist as they have coexisted for as long as there have been both tigers and pythons in this landscape, which is a very long time. The water of the Sundarbans is salt, or rather it is a constantly shifting gradient from fresh in the upper reaches, where river water dominates, to fully marine at the tidal mouths where the Bay of Bengal pushes in with the tide. The Indian python navigates this gradient with ease. It is documented swimming between islands, crossing tidal channels, hunting in the mangrove roots and mud at the tidal line. Its ability to manage salt exposure is not unlimited, but in the mixed salinity environment of a major river delta, it functions without apparent difficulty, adding the tidal ecosystem to its hunting territory, in the way that a generalist predator always adds marginal habitats to its range when the core habitat provides sufficient resources. The sounds of the Sundarbans. This is something that does not translate into the visual medium of documentation, but that shapes the reality of what it is to be in this ecosystem, in a way that matters. The Sundarbans is never quiet. The tidal rhythm imposes a constant acoustic background, the movement of water through roots and over mud, the suction sound of the mud releasing with the tide. The birds are always calling, the kingfishers and the egrets and the herons and the raptors that quarter the creek edges. The spotted deer bark their alarm calls, a sound that carries through the forest with astonishing clarity, and that functions as an early warning system for every other species in the area, including in a very different way for the python. A python that has not moved for 3 days does not alarm deer. A python that is moving, or that has recently moved, triggers the alarm network of the forest, and the acoustic change in the surrounding habitat is information. The python listens to the forest in the way that a hunter who has been in a landscape their entire life learns to listen. Not analyzing, not categorizing, but registering. The silence that follows an alarm call. The way the alarm call shifts direction, indicating the movement of whatever caused it. The resumption of normal bird sound, as the threat, if it is not the python, moves away. The python lying at a forest edge is receiving all of this continuously, filtering it against its own sensory picture of the environment, building a real-time model of what is near, what is moving, what might come closer. And across the world, in West Africa, in the savanna forest mosaic of Ghana and Nigeria and Cameroon and the Great Congo Basin, the African rock python is doing the same thing in a different key. The African rock python is the largest snake in Africa. The largest reliably documented specimens have reached over 5 meters in length and approached 100 kilograms in weight. Exceptional individuals have been reported at considerably larger sizes, and while the extreme reports of 6 or even 7-meter rock pythons must be treated with appropriate skepticism, given the general human tendency to exaggerate snake sizes, the African rock python is unambiguously a massive animal, one of the 3 largest snakes in the world, alongside the reticulated and the Burmese. In the savanna habitats of East and Southern Africa, where the African rock python is perhaps most frequently observed by visitors to the continent's national parks, the snake occupies a niche that is both similar to and different from its Asian relatives. The prey base includes impala, and Thompson's gazelle, and warthog, and vervet, monkey, and baboon, and a variety of monitor lizards and waterbirds. The habitat structure, open savanna with rocky cupias and riverine gallery forest and seasonal waterholes, requires a different set of hunting strategies than the dense rainforest that the reticulated occupies. The waterhole strategy is the African rock python's most famous hunting method. In the dry season, when water sources have contracted to isolated permanent pools, and every animal on the savanna must drink or die, the rock python positions itself at the water's edge with a patience and a stillness that reflects the full capability of the python's sensory suite. The python may spend days at a productive waterhole. It may take one prey animal and then remain for another week, the digesting meals visible as a bulge in its body, still positioned at the water, because the energy cost of repositioning is not worth the benefit, while this site continues to deliver prey. The waterhole gives the python the same advantage that it gives every predator who uses this strategy. The prey must come to the predator. The moment of the strike at a waterhole, there is a quality to the ambush that is impossible to fully describe, but that every person who has witnessed it carries with them forever. The impala at the water's edge, leaning down, every muscle oriented toward the act of drinking, the ears moving but the eyes down. The rock, which is not a rock, the root tangle at the water's edge, which is not a root tangle, the absolute stillness. And then the motion, which is not gradual, which is instantaneous. The head forward, the coils following, the water erupting in a confusion of spray and movement, and then the settling into the characteristic stillness of constriction, the python lying at the water's edge, with an impala in its coils, and nothing to do now but wait. Crocodiles share these waterholes. The Nile crocodile, Africa's largest reptile, the apex ambush predator of the aquatic environment, is as capable of taking a python at a waterhole as the python is capable of taking anything else that comes to drink. The relationship between rock python and Nile crocodile is complex and contested, and the outcome of any particular encounter depends heavily on the sizes of the animals involved. A large rock python and a juvenile crocodile, the python has the advantage. A large Nile crocodile and even a very large rock python, the crocodile has the advantage. The overlap zone, where both animals are of comparable size, produces encounters whose outcome is genuinely uncertain, and there are documented cases going both ways. This is the python kingdom, not a single habitat, not a single continent, not a single hunting strategy or prey base or social system. A kingdom that spans 3 continents and dozens of ecosystems, and millions of years of evolutionary time. A kingdom built on patience and efficiency, and a body plan so elegantly effective that the planet's most disruptive force, 65 million years of shifting climates and rising and falling sea levels and continental movements and mass extinctions, has not replaced it. Let us talk about what the python means for the health of ecosystems, because this is a conversation that is easy to miss in the drama of the predation itself. The python is not just a predator. It is a regulator. It is a component of a system. And the way it functions